Welcome to the Stressless Eating Podcast, where we help diet-obsessed and food-crazed women break themselves out of the food and body prison, end the dieting madness, and take control of their health for good. I'm your host, Leanne Ellington, and this podcast is about answering one question. How can you heal your relationship with food and your body and take a practical approach to this whole self-love journey, but without all that restriction, obsession, and shame, and without needing years of therapy to do so? If you want to know the answer, you're in the right place. All this information is 100% free, so please subscribe to and review our podcast. We are live. Welcome back to the Stressless Eating Podcast. I'm so excited. I have my best friend in the world here on our podcast. She's been here before, and her name is Laura Lea. Hello, Laura Lea.
Hi, I'm so happy.
Yay, we're so glad. This is our first time doing it not live in person because she moved to Asheville recently, which we'll get into. But you've been on the podcast several times before, and it's really been a lot of the food related stuff, a lot of the cooking. Obviously, you are a holistic chef, a cookbook author multiple times over, but you also really help women take control of their lives by taking control of their kitchen through the foods that they eat and really becoming a stressless cook. And we've talked about that, many times on the podcast, but today we're going to really keep it real and get into some of the non-food and body related stuff, even though it's all kind of interrelated, and really talk about this idea of carving out your identity, your true self, your worth, your value in a couple of ways in the midst of being an influencer in today's, society. You live a very public life, and also just in the midst of being a woman in modern day society and life as you've been living it. So we're going to dive in. But before we do, for those who don't know you, just kind of share, a little bit about who you are, what you're up to in this world. And so we can just get to know you for those of us who don't.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you. My name is Laura Lea. I'm a holistic chef, and I got that title 8 years ago when I went to culinary school in New York City. And I feel less and less attached to that label as time goes on. And it was really intended to describe the fact that we had a culinary degree, like a chef's training degree, but also that we understood the relationship between food and healing. But the healing part of it for me has gotten so detached from food content itself. And we can talk about that at this time or another time. But I've basically spent the last 8 years evolving a way to communicate the different kinds of wellness that you can get through food. And that's not like I'm sort of getting at, it's not just about the nutrients itself. It's about so much more. And so even though I create recipes, I am trying to focus on a much less dogmatic approach to make things accessible and meet people where they are. And so I'm doing that in a bunch of different ways through books and meal plans, which are turning into a book, and my blog and social media.
Awesome. Well, we'll show and share how to get in touch with you and get a hold of you. But in the meantime, we're going to dive in. And so the first thing I want to talk about is, most of the people that know you, like I said, you live this public life. You are front and center on Instagram, on people's podcasts, including this one, on your blog, all those things. And, hundreds of thousands of people are having eyeballs on you every single week, every single month, every single year. One of the reasons I love you, among many, is that that has not changed who you are. Like anybody I describe you to, I'm like, you don't understand. Yes, she is, in the public eye, but she is so down to earth and chill and just this good-hearted, good intentioned woman. And I know a lot of people haven't necessarily been able to maintain that and take on a persona of who they think they should be or who people want them to be. So can you just share a little bit about what it's been like, growing yourself, growing up, because you were kind of on Instagram before Instagram was even really a thing, growing up and growing yourself up over the last 8 years on Instagram and really growing your career and becoming an authority in your space in the public eye. What's that been like, and what are some of the lessons that you've gleaned from that experience?
Yeah, it has been wild. First of all, thank you so much for saying that. I honestly don't know what it would look like to not just be like a normal, kind person, because I'm so acutely aware and have been from the beginning that people on Instagram, and I don't say this, and this is not a bad thing at all. People are there for what I give to them. They're not there because they actually know me or really care about my welfare. I mean, of course, I think there are people who feel invested and might have a fleeting moment of compassion for me if I'm going through something. And I appreciate the kindness that I've gotten from people when I have shared what I've gone through. But at the end of the day, you can only care so much about someone that you just don't know. And I've always been aware of that. And so that's been really helpful for me, I think, in staying grounded. But it has given me so much. And honestly, just from sort of a functional perspective, it's hands down the best way that I've grown my business. But it's taught me a lot about humility, and it has taught me to have a much thicker skin. I definitely did not handle criticism that well before I started to get it all the time. And Leanne knows this is something I still struggle with, knowing that people say unkind things about me, but I just try to focus on the people who do know me intimately and for the right reasons, and and do my best and let it go.
Yeah, I love that. And so, for anybody who watches your videos or your stories, like when you watch you can tell that you're just being authentic. It's just this, down home girl kind of, it's like the gal next door. She could be your neighbor. It's not somebody like, hey, I have, tens of pounds of makeup on and I have all these sponsors that are following me around, doing, telling me to hold this Pepsi right here, product like whatever it is, you know what I mean? It's just very authentic. Like when you go to press play, like what is the kind of filter that you use or the principles that that kind of guide you when you show up and when you're communicating your messages?
I honestly I put effort into it, especially if I'm doing something curated or sponsored, which I do. I don't do a ton of it, but I do. But for the most part, I really just try to talk like I speak as if I were speaking to you in person. I mean, with some, definitely with some filters there, with some boundaries. But I really try to just be as much myself to my community as I would be in person. And if you've been around my community, you know that I wear Target, I get pit stains, I get greasy hair. I talked about my back knee this morning on my stories, a lot of cat content, but I also try to make sure that while I am just sharing like the real raw of my life, I'm also offering food content on a consistent basis as well. But I am not the food person to come to if you're expecting something where I'm just like dolled up, buttoned up all the time. And there's plenty of people who do that. And there's something to be said for that. Of course, like there's something appealing about a Martha Stewart type, but I'm not a domestic goddess. I'm not like the consummate hostess. I'm just kind of a casual person. And I just try to show up that way.
I love it. I love it. Now that you're so defined in who you are, it's there's been some challenges. Like it's got to be a little bit seductive sometime, or maybe it used to be like a little bit seductive to kind of feed into that. And like, what were some of the temptations, for us behind the scenes of what it's like to be, an influencer in the public eye nowadays? Like, what are some of the temptations in terms of like offers and things that like are out of alignment that you had to actually choose alignment over like a short-term gratification?
It's still always tempting as I've grown and I've gotten partnership and sponsorship opportunities when someone offers me a lot of money for something, even though I know that it's not a product that's aligned with my business. There's always, to be totally honest, there's always a moment where I'm like, dang, that's a lot of money. And can I mentally make this somehow fit? But without fail, with any big decision like that, I always end up choosing what is aligned with my brand. At the end of the day, I could never talk about something that I either haven't personally used and experienced or that I think doesn't fit into my definition of wellness, which is pretty expansive.
Yeah.
And so that can certainly be tempting, of course. And then to make sure that everything always looks pristine and put together and not share some of the more painful things and to gloss over them. And I did that 3 years ago. I got divorced. I really barely talked about it or showed emotion about it. And I don't know that I would do it differently. looking back on that particular thing, but that particular experience. But this about 3 months ago, I went through something painful and did decide to share a little bit more about it without actually going into what had happened. I just shared more about kind of how I was feeling. And I found that to be very therapeutic and healing.
Yeah. And it's so cool because, obviously this has been a consistent conversation with you and I behind the scenes, like having, I was there for your divorce. I was here, 3 months ago for this, like all of this. And it was a very different experience of it. And part of it was, feeling like you have to compartmentalize who you are and put on this kind of show and the growth, not that you were putting on a show around your divorce, but it was just like, hey, I'm not going to mention it. Right. But now you're like, this is going to dictate the next season of my life. Like I'm going through this growing opportunity, this, or I say opportunity, but like you chose to take yourself through a lot of growth. You chose to share. So what was that like to make that decision to share with your tribe, the breakup that you went through, the aftermath of it, and then the journey that it led you to, continuing to right now?
I feel like with my divorce, it was really painful. It was divorce was excruciating. It was really, really painful. But in my mind, if I talked about that part of it, then I was a failure. And when I went through my more recent breakup, I felt like even more of a failure. But I just found myself not wanting to pretend like I didn't feel like a failure. And again, I didn't want to just put on a brave face and go back to cooking every day like nothing had happened. That felt disingenuous to just the story of my life, the arc of my life. And I also think looking back, I didn't put enough time and thought and healing into my divorce. And it's, I think, why it took me another 3 years to make some of the big decisions that I've made, aside from people and relationships, really the decisions that I needed to make for myself, the learning and the healing and the growth that I needed to do 3 years ago. I really didn't do it after my divorce. I didn't do it then because I put on the Southern woman's, chameleon face and went about my life. And that came back to bite me in the butt.
Absolutely. And so, I've witnessed this in the back end. And I honestly, me, I don't really go on Instagram, so I don't know really what you've shared on your stories as much, but like, what do you think? I know that obviously this time it was about really knowing your value, really knowing your worth, really finding your voice, finding the courage to speak up for what you want. Like, what would you say has been the journey that you're on? And what are some of your biggest lessons that you've learned from the breakdown to breakthrough?
I kind of going back to the concept of being a chameleon. My whole life, I've thought of myself as I've seen myself and acted like I'll have what she's having or he's having kind of person. That was how I identified myself. And as a result, I want to be very careful. This is not about anyone else. It is truly about me, and Leanne knew this, and she's been saying this to me for years. I didn't know how to choose myself because I didn't know who I was, and I didn't love myself. I didn't know myself. And I realized that I've spent the last 10 years asking, when I meet someone that I'm interested in, who do you want me to be? And how do I show up as the person that you see me as and who you want me to be? And that is just never going to be a successful recipe ever. And so 3 months ago, I had that realization that I didn't know who I was. I wasn't my own dream version of myself. I wasn't in love with myself. I wasn't connected to a higher power. And that all of those things were factors in why I, had three serious relationships in 10 years that didn't work out. And I had wanted to move to Asheville, North Carolina for the last 8 years. And I had let relationships get in the way of that every single time. And I wanted to move here, I think, because I knew it would be a huge, wonderful, healing, scary part of this journey of aloneness and being present with myself and getting to know myself. So it took going through a really, painful relationship ending to finally catalyze making that choice and making this move for myself. And then it just really snowballed from there. I feel like that work and that healing and coaching.
Yeah. And a lot of it for you was just like realizing like, no, I'm not willing to receive that any longer. Like I'm raising the bar on myself. So what do you think is the bar that you've raised on yourself in terms of what you're allowed to receive or allowing yourself to receive from friends and future romantic partners and even, work and stuff like that? Like what's the bar that's been now set over these past 3 months that you did draw the line in the sand and say, I'm choosing me for the first time ever?
Mm-hmm. I think it's as simple as, and again, and this is family, this is friends, this is partners. This is not good or bad, right or wrong with anyone. It's just, does it work for me or does it not? And I think that I have had to end really relationships in all aspects of my life where someone wanted to make assumptions about me based off of my past, based off of their own projections, based off of their own desires for a relationship, whether it is as a friend or a partner and I feel like I had to create some hard boundaries with anyone who wasn't making wasn't building our relationship based off of who I am to them, present and today. But I also want to say, so much of that was what I was reflecting back. So it's like this double-edged sword where the bar was about, okay, some people in my life, I think, want me to be somebody different than I am, or want me, or only want to know me based off of who I've been. But I also think that I had to most importantly raise the bar on how I see myself. And that was such a clear thing. Leanne has always said, as soon as you choose yourself, the rest just comes together really naturally and the decisions become really clear. That's what I did.
Yeah. So good. So good. And so for anybody that is listening to this, past, present, future, like anybody that is, and I say past, present, future, as in like our age group, older, younger generations coming up, if there was anything that you wish you could tell your younger self about knowing your value, knowing your worth, what you have the ability to say yes to, what you have the ability to say no to, what you wish you knew then that you know now, what would some of that be?
Firstly, take the time, and this is something I'm still doing, and I'm within the context of a busy life, and I have all sorts of relationships in my life. Taking the time to really get to know yourself is one of the most important things that you can do. Just really sort of on a practical level. Who am I? What do I like? What is my opinion on things? And how does something make me feel? What's a hard, what's a hell yes? What's a hell no for me? Just really, really simply getting to spend time with yourself and fall in love with yourself and go on that journey, I think is important. So as many distractions as you can remove from your life. That's really what I've been trying to do. I think is incredibly healing. I would also say surround yourself with my friends have been invaluable. Leanne is my family. Find people who love you the way that you want to love yourself and trust them and ask them for help. That was really hard to do, but be willing to ask for favors, be willing to ask for people to stick their neck out for you, because if they really love you, they'll be so happy to have an opportunity to do that. So I think that's hugely important. And a lot of the time that's not your actual family. I have a wonderfully supportive and amazing family, and they've wanted to be there for me, but they don't know me as well as an adult. So I've had to rely on friends for things because they've known me in a different way. I think that this is something that's ongoing, and Leanne inspires me with this as well, but just trying to, whatever you believe in that's bigger than yourself, trying to really cultivate that relationship is so hugely important. You can't do it by yourself. That wasn't a part of the relationships that I had romantically, just really turning to something bigger. And I think that was a problem as well. So yeah, go on a journey of finding yourself and falling in love with yourself, whatever that looks like for you. Find a supportive group of people, create boundaries, and do your absolute best to communicate them and stick to them, and figure out a way to serve and find something that's, more important than you. Those would definitely be some.
I love it. I love it. And just to stack on it, and you and I have talked about this so much before, it's that love, and what comes under that umbrella of love is liking yourself more and trusting yourself more, and learning that you can listen to that inner voice, and learning to listen to that inner voice, but also learning to trust it, and sometimes to not trust it and question it and see the lies that our stories are telling that we're telling to ourselves about ourselves, and question things instead of just saying yes, please, or yes, ma'am, or whatever it is. And that actually brings us to my next question, which is like, you and I talk a lot about being recovering people pleasers, and just finding, part of that is finding your own voice and trusting in your own, trusting your intuition and being aligned with values. So then it becomes binary. It's like, this brings me closer to my values or further away. What has changed for you in the past few years in terms of just like feeling like you have to say yes to everything and please everyone? And how has this journey influenced that for you?
I love that. It's one of the things my mom taught me growing up is my mom is not a big shopper. She's very frugal. Leanne and I are both super frugal people. And I think it's because I really internalized when she told me over and over again, she was like, you'll never walk into a store and not find something that you want, And so you can go and you can buy out the whole store every single time, but they're going to change their line seasonally, and you're going to go back and you're going to want something new every single time. So don't get in that rat race with yourself, and learn to have gratitude for and be, present with the things that you do have, because and I think that in some ways that's the lesson I've had to learn with social media as well, is that there's always going to be someone else who isn't happy with how you show up and who you are. And if you try to like whack-a-mole those people and please cover every single base, you will be you're just, it's a losing battle, and it's absolutely miserable. And I really tried to do that for a while, and I've gotten really comfortable with the fact that I might as well say no to things that don't serve me and that don't bring me joy and that take my energy away, because I can't win the alternative. Yeah. So that's been super helpful. And just recognizing that I am a pretty introverted person. I am someone who needs to protect my energy, and learning the distinction between, I have a story that I'm a selfish person because I am someone who has to be highly protective of my energy, because I do get depleted really easily. And I am a direct reflection of my self-care. I know people who are just like Energizer bunnies. And even when they feel terrible and they aren't taking care of themselves, it doesn't seem to affect how they show up, but it really does for me. So I have to be a selfish person. And some people are going to see that in a sort of traditionally selfish way. And that's just not my problem.
Yeah. By the way, she's putting up air quotes, guys, when she's saying selfish. Okay. Because this is audio, but she, knowing, and that's what we talk about. Like, people think it's selfish to take care of themselves. And I would argue that it's actually selfish not to, because the people that we want to contribute to, that are in line to get our time, our energy, our heart, our soul, our care, they can't get it. We can't give from an empty cup. You know what I mean? We can't give what we don't have. So I am a big believer that self-care is not selfish, and it making ourselves priority. It is, not to sound all, cheesy, but it's that, putting your oxygen mask on first, you'll be able to give to others, even more in spades. The other thing that you mentioned, the whole whack-a-mole thing, and, what people don't see behind the scenes, and they might not like assume it because they think it might be, more glamorous than it is or whatever. But like, even though you are not controversial online, like you just share your truths, you're not there to talk about politics. You're not there to talk about religion. You're not there to talk about like COVID and the vaccine, like all those things. Like, you're just talking about what you know, love, and appreciate, and sharing the heart of who you are. But that doesn't mean that you don't have haters that come on there, and those, keyboard warriors, and they send you, I was going to say PMs, but I guess they're DMs on Instagram. You're always helping with the Instagram lingo.
I love it.
But, how do you handle that? How do you internally process that? Because it is just kind of part of the game that you're in, right?
Yeah, people can be really, really mean. Most of my community is super sweet and loving. I think I have such a fantastic community, but especially in 2020, people were pretty vicious. And I think it was helpful actually, because it was so the correlation between what was happening in the world and the level of just toxicity in my inbox was so direct and obvious that it just really hammered home that it wasn't about me. And I think that's the biggest distinction is really recognizing that whatever people are taking the time to share to a complete stranger, if someone is that worked up about what a stranger thinks or feels or says, it is just a pure reflection of whatever they have going on. And it's not about me. I also used to try to combat it and respond to people. And most of the time I either ignore them and sometimes I block them. And those are boundaries I've created that have been really helpful. Is just like, this is my house. Would you say that to me if you were a guest in my home? No. So, don't in my social media home.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that applies to all of us, whether it's a social media community or I can't even tell you how many, women I talk to that they're doing certain things because they're afraid of what will happen if they don't or what people will say. One of my clients celebrated with me this week where she went to her 20-year high school reunion and she's like, you know what? I had one drink because I didn't care that people were going to be like, why isn't she drinking? And I left at 11 p.m. instead of 3 a.m. because I wasn't worried about people caring or being mad that I left. She's like, and I had the best night. And it was just nothing really changed other than her mental conversation with herself and setting up boundaries and really caring what she thinks about her life more than she cares about what other people think about her life. And I think that's really what you're saying here is like, that is a reflection of what they're experiencing and what they're going through and the filter that they're viewing their lives through. It's not personal. And again, as a recovering people pleaser, like you said, you used to like get defensive or combative. And now it's just like, hey, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Yeah, totally. It's amazing how little people actually care about other people. Like when it comes to things like that. I mean, we and I have done this so many times. I'm like, oh my God, they must all be thinking and saying and obsessing over, this thing I did or whatever. The reality is it's a moment. It's a quick, fleeting moment for most people. And then they're back to focusing on their own lives. And we're the same. I'm the same way. I may pass a judgment in my head about somebody, but one, it's again, 100% about me and however that thought serves me in that moment. And then I go back to obsessing over my own life. So it's like, don't have the drink or do have the drink, leave or don't leave, and know that like either way, people just care a lot less than you think they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think really the theme of all of this is that the more solid you become in yourself, it's not that other people's opinions won't matter. Like we are wired to care what other people think about us, especially the female brain, that part of our brain, the social brain, it's bigger, it's more active than the male brain. So we are actually wired to be not just more emotional, but care about those, what I call third party perceptions. So it's not that we won't care, but the more solid we get in how we see ourselves, the more resilient we are, the more we care about what we think and say and feel about ourselves, the less the rest matters, the less attention, time, energy, focus we have on that other stuff, and the happier we just become.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
1,000%.
Well, before we wind down, what are any other lessons? Obviously, you moved to your dream city, Asheville. You got out of a relationship that wasn't serving you. You really, took this season to heal and grow and just, connect to yourself and fall in love and and trust with yourself. What's anything else you would want anyone to know about that journey of discovering themselves and, any kind of sage wisdom or advice you would give to anyone who's looking to get on that journey or is on that journey right now?
Yeah, something that's cropped up for me a lot, especially a few months ago when I was going through a grief process, is this idea that nothing is linear. Very few things follow a linear path. And I think we fall into the trap of being like, I'm healed now, or this is better. And so then we beat ourselves up when we circulate old feelings as we're exposed to new experiences and new vulnerabilities, especially once we get vulnerable again. It's so easy for those same thoughts to come up and to remember not only are things not not only are most processes nonlinear, but just because you feel things again and they come up again doesn't mean you haven't done the work, and it doesn't mean you're not growing, and it doesn't mean that you're going to repeat old patterns. And Leanne, I mean, I don't even know, like maybe you want to speak to that too, because I feel like that's one of the primary things you do so well with stressless eating is explaining to people that like, you're like, we don't even need to focus on the why. I think that's what people get so locked into, the why, that they lose the forest between the trees because they just want to, like you've said before, psychoanalyze themselves to death. And because that's our reaction when we find ourselves slipping back into old quote bad patterns. I think why is the first question. How am I here again? Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening again. And to really try not to do that and just focus on the tools that you know that you've cultivated for yourself and implement them over and over again and have a lot of compassion for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it best with the compassion piece of the puzzle. And yeah, just to speak to that, I think there's a couple distinctions in here. The first one that comes to mind is there is a difference between like being in a regressed state momentarily versus I have regressed. I'm back where I started. This isn't working, that kind of thing. We can have these momentary regressions where our thoughts are kind of taking over, but it doesn't mean we're back where we started or we've backslid or that anything wrong has happened, because we are never the same person. Even if we're going through the same circumstances, we're not the same person. We have different experiences and we get to choose who we are based on who we are today. Like we always have a choice. But also, I think it's pretty in vogue, especially in the kind of psychotherapy world. And it's not always like this, but to explore, why do you do that? Why am I like this? Why can't I stop this? Why does this keep happening? And all of those why questions. And questioning can be a helpful tool to an extent. And it's not that the answers to those questions don't matter. They just don't make a difference in how you can choose to show up today. Right. And often what happens is we get stuck in the weeds. We get bogged down. We're psychoanalyzing it. And all that does is it leaves us focusing on the problem, where what we really need to be doing is focusing on the solution. So, sometimes it's skillful to spend 1 to 5% of our energy focusing on the problem just to be able to identify it so that we can then move through compassion of oh, no wonder you're feeling shame right now because you're experiencing X, Y, or Z. Oh, okay. And hold space for ourselves, that compassion piece of the puzzle that most people skip because they're so busy being mad at themselves, resenting themselves, blaming themselves, shaming themselves. So 1 to 5% spent focusing on the problem, just clearly enough to identify it, but then really moving into the solution, feeling the suck, not trying to put roses and butterflies on it, moving through that clean cycle of pain, which a lot of us, again, don't know how to do. We get so stuck in the dirty pain of shame and criticism and self-resentment and self-rejection and self-loathing and all that stuff versus just feeling oh, wow, I am feeling some shame right now. And that's okay. And having compassion for ourselves, holding space for ourselves, and then even asking ourselves as simple of a question as what do I need right now? What do I really need right now? Sometimes it's external support. Sometimes it's internal support. Sometimes it's something higher above, something we can't see. Sometimes it's oh my gosh, I'm actually starving and haven't slept. I need a sandwich and a nap. You know what I mean? It's different, but we want to get in the habit of asking ourselves those questions rather than those kind of rabbit hole questions of why am I like this? Why do I do that? Because all it does is leave us as a victim to our circumstances and focusing on the problem. And the solution never lives in the direction of where the problem started, because you can't find a solution to a problem with the same brain that created it. So I love that you brought that up. It's so true. And not getting bogged down in it and really holding that space, holding compassion. So, well, thank you as always for being here. And I love that we got to have not that there's anything wrong with the food and the body conversation. There's obviously this podcast is called Stressless Eating. But it's very clear, obviously, and hopefully it is to you, anybody who's listening right now, that the food is just a symptom of something so much bigger. And when you don't know who you are, we talked about all of those, the wobbles and the people pleasing and all that you went through. But these are the kinds of things that cause a woman that doesn't have a healthy relationship with food to go binge on nachos and, cookies and numb out on Netflix for 12 hours and, nap her way through her day off and feel all of that cognitive dissonance and shame and blame and all that. So even though these topics don't necessarily seem like they're related to food and your relationship with your body or your struggles with that, it is all connected. Nothing is unrelated. It's all really woven into each other. So thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing this vulnerable side of you, and thanks for showing up authentically and congruent to who you are, and allowing us to all get a sneak peek of that.
Thanks for having me. I love you.
Love you. Awesome, ladies. Thanks for being here on this episode of the podcast, and we will talk to you soon. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard and you're interested in breaking out of your own food, body, and diet prison, here's what I want you to do next. Head on over to stresslesseating.com. That's stresslesseating.com, and sign up to watch the Stressless Eating webinar, where I'll walk you through the exact 5-step game plan my female clients use to conquer emotional eating, self-sabotage, and finally heal themselves from the restrictive all-or-nothing diet mentality for good, but without obsessing or spending years in therapy to address it. I've laid it all out for you there in 5 easy steps. Remember, healing your relationship with food and your body does not happen by itself. You need expert guidance to make it happen, and we've helped clients all over the world take back their power from the food and find true and lasting freedom, while enjoying life and warm chocolate chip cookies along the way. To see if we can help you do the same, head on over to stresslesseating.com. I'm Leanne Ellington, and I'll see you next time.